Welcome back to another episode of Rustomod Garage. In this episode, we're going to try to fix the C10 and get it dialed in for the track. In the last episode, you saw us really struggle at the drag strip, trying to figure out some transmission issues and some final details that we missed on the C10 and kind of let us hanging at the drag strip. So in this episode, we're going to try to sort all those problems out and hopefully be ready to go on our next test and tune. So at first, I'm going to try to check the boost and the fuel pressure to make sure I can fix both those issues, and then we'll work on the transmission. In the episode where I was drag racing this thing, you could see on the gauge it was only making 9 pounds of boost. So this really should be at around 12 to 15 pounds of boost is where we really like to run it. So that's a little bit less boost than what we'd like to run. So right now I'm just running it off of the spring pressure, and I had this 5-pound spring in it and it was making around 9 pounds, which not really sure why it's making over boosting a little bit. It should really be making 5 pounds, and whenever we dynoed it, it was consistently making 5 pounds. So just for a little test here, I want to try to throw this 8-pound spring in it and see if it makes a difference. So I'm going to try that and see what kind of boost we're going to run, just for a quick test to see if I can dial in where we want to be on this thing. So I'm going to hook this thing up and then we'll go out and make a test run. All right, this thing's warming up here, so I'm gonna go see what its difference is with that new spring in it. So we'll have to keep an eye on the boost gauge here and see what it does. That feels good. Much better. Much better than what I wish we did that at the track. Alright. That's the boost we want to run. Now we just got to get the trans brake and the lockup to work. So we're going to step in the right direction for sure. Alright guys, I brought this thing home. I have a little bit more open roads here where I can test this thing out. So I noticed in the last video that I just put up that the fuel pressure in the C10 was really low whenever we were driving under boost. And on this fuel setup, I have 2 fuel pumps and they run in series. So when the key is turned and the truck's idling, the first fuel pump will kick on. And then whenever you hit 1 pound of boost, the second fuel pump should kick on. And so what was happening was the second fuel pump just wasn't kicking on. And I ended up finding out that we have these connectors like this. They're solder connectors where you pinch them together and then you heat them up and they'll solder the 2 wires together. Ended up, I've had trouble with these things and they just don't seem to make a really good connection, and sometimes they'll break off. So we actually had to replace a few of them. So just temporarily, like I said, I'm at my house, so I don't have all the nice tools. I just butt connected 2 of these together and ended up, that was my problem. So it was just not making a good connection and the second fuel pump wasn't kicking on. So luckily I spotted that because I didn't want to run this thing lean, especially under boost. So now it makes really good fuel pressure, and I did a data log just to make sure everything was right, and I discovered another issue, and I'll show you guys that now. All right, so kind of to explain, I just have the data log open that we ran a little bit ago. Our yellow line here is our fuel pressure, and so we are making right at, it says we're making 50 pounds of fuel pressure at 3,700 RPM. And like I said, I can't rev it up any higher than that whenever I'm on my brake because my brake doesn't work. But now I'm moving and we're still making around 55 pounds of fuel pressure. So fuel pressure is good, so that solved my issue. But one thing I noticed is on our boost, and you guys remember I changed the 5-pound spring out and put a 7-pound spring in because I thought that it was boost creeping on my boost gauge. Now either I just have the boost gauge plumbed to the incorrect spot, or my boost gauge is way off, because according to my map sensor here, I'm only making right at 8 pounds of boost at 6,600 RPM, and let's see, 6,700 RPM, right where I normally shift, and I could shift a little bit later than that. I'm only making 8.1 pounds of boost. So the spring is right, and we have no boost creep. According to this, my boost gauge is supposed to be way off. So that's kind of what I determined. So I'm going to try to put a better spring in it and see what that difference that makes. I was wondering why this thing kind of felt really slow. So I'm gonna try to put maybe a 15-pound spring in it, because like I said on the dyno, we were running around 10 to 12 pounds of boost, and it made right around 700 horsepower. So I should be good to run around 15 pounds. So I'm gonna put a 14-pound spring in it, see if that makes a difference, and see what the data log says then. So because I really want to run a little bit more boost, hopefully it will cause it to spool a little bit quicker and everything like that, so my wastegate stays shut longer. So I'm going to try to put a new spring in it and see what difference that makes. I hope that this is the issue that I've been having, and whenever I put the trans brake in, we should be ready to go. All right, so I'm just going to pop this wastegate cap off, switch this spring out to a heavier spring, and we'll see what kind of boost it makes now. Should be much different, so I'm excited to see how this thing works. All right, so I looked up on the chart and it said to run a black spring and the red spring for about 14.5 psi. So that's pretty much perfect. My boost cut is at 15, so I might have to raise it a little bit, but that should work for what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna slap this thing on and hopefully make another test drive and see how that works. All right, so we're gonna go out and make another run. Fuel pressure is looking good, and we're gonna be keeping an eye on this boost gauge instead of this boost gauge, because this one seems to be completely wrong. So we're gonna see how this next run will do on 15, it's like 14.5 pound spring in it.
12, 13, 15, 14. You're at 14 and holding. You hit 15 twice. Yes, they hit boost cut.
Okay, so here's our boost. So it's kind of hard to see. Let me get rid of some of this stuff. So if you can see this red line here, this red line is our boost here. And it shoots right up to around 14.6, so it's right around where it's supposed to be. And then, but our boost cut is at 15. And so that's why it ended up cutting ignition and our air fuel ratio shot up. I'm just gonna have to raise the boost cut up. I'm not really sure why it spiked like that, but it definitely made a big difference. So going to have to raise the boost cut up to around 17, I would say, and then that should be good for the kind of power that we want to run. So it's right around 14.5 to 15 psi. So that should work perfect. All right, so now that we got our boost and our fuel pressure fixed, I'm gonna slap in our transmission parts, because both of the solenoids on the lockup torque converter and our trans brake ended up going bad. So I'm gonna slap those in, and hopefully that'll solve our issues, and then we can test this thing before we go to the track this time. So let's throw them in. All right, got this thing up on the lift, and I got my two solenoids in. So this is the trans brake, and I'm gonna have to unhook that, and the trans brake on this is inside the pan. So the solenoid isn't working, and the torque converter lockup solenoid also isn't working. So going to have to pull all the bolts out of this, undo the wires, and then drop the pan out. I'm gonna try to drain the fluid out, and hopefully I can reuse the fluid to see how dirty it is. But fluid's pretty expensive, so I might be able to reuse it. I got a clean bucket, so I might drain it into that. Try to reuse the fluid. If not, I'm gonna have to go get some fluid, fill it back up, change the solenoids out, check everything, make sure everything is good, and hopefully our transmission issues are solved. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, we got the new lockup solenoid installed, and then we got the solenoids cleaned. They were filled with junk on the trans brake, so we got another one, but they only sent one of them. So we're cleaning them out, and they've checked them, they both work. We replaced the filter, so we're going to hopefully put some fresh fluid in it and test it again. So hopefully this works this time. All right, got this whole thing buttoned up, got everything tightened down and everything. So man, I really hope this works. Got the solenoid hooked back up, and then I got the new solenoids put in. So hopefully this works. I really hope that was just a simple fix. So we'll put some fresh fluid in it, and we will hopefully be able to test this thing out. We got this thing back on the ground, so I'm gonna put some fluid in it and then test it out. I got 3 gallons, so this is a little bit deeper pan, so normally it's about 13 quarts, so we're gonna put a little bit more. We'll have to check the stick, but fill it up and test it out. Well, it's dark out now, but we got the fluid topped off into the transmission, so now we're gonna try to drive it out for the first time and test it, so hopefully it works. All right, I'm gonna drive it around the block and see how it does. Hopefully this is the fix. All right, I'm gonna drive around the block, check the transmission fluid and everything, and hopefully this is the fix. Well, in that last clip, that camera ended up dying and we didn't get to film what happened whenever I tried to test the lockup and the trans brake, but they didn't work anyway. So my camera ended up dying and I lost the footage. But we did all that work, pulled the whole thing apart. We saw some dirt in the transmission fluid, so we figured that the solenoids just got clogged up, replaced the solenoids, and they still didn't work. So we're gonna end up having to call the transmission company and try to figure out what we're gonna do. If you guys know a good transmission that you would recommend, we're using a 4L80, a four-wheel drive 4L80. We're making about 800 horsepower. We need a 4,000 stall converter and a trans brake. Let me know what's the best option down in the comments. I know you guys run some really good 4L80s and haven't had so many issues with them. So if you guys have any suggestions, let me know down below. But our situation right now is the transmission lockup doesn't work and our trans brake still doesn't work. It shifts fine, shifts really good, and it holds the power perfectly fine. Just we're having a solenoid issue or some kind of electrical issue where it won't go into lockup, and when we hit the trans brake, nothing happens. It worked once whenever I tested it. We hit the track and it hasn't worked since. So hopefully we can get this issue fixed, but we're running out of days here with our local track. Only a few test and tunes left. So it's November now and it's towards the end of the season. So we're trying to get this thing down the track to make some kind of good pass before the end of the season, but that's really not looking good for us. So next weekend there is a test and tune and we will be back on the track, trying to at least foot brake it off the line and see what this thing can do now that it's making its proper 15 pounds of boost. On the street, this thing really moves out and it feels so much better. I can't believe we were only running it on 5 pounds this entire time. I switched it to the 8-pound spring and it felt really good, and now it's on 15 pounds and it feels so much better. So I'm really happy with that. Just have to figure out this transmission issue and we should be good to go. So once we do a few more track days with the C10, that's going to wrap up this whole build. We've done the bed, we've done a bunch of other things to it. We went over the entire build and I've gotten some great response from you guys trying to build something very similar to this build, and we're just trying to dial it in just like everybody else. So in a few weeks we'll start a new build series and we will do all the fabrication and all the cool customization stuff. All the machining and everything will be filmed, and we'll show you guys how we're going to build this next project. So stay tuned for the next build series and stay tuned for this thing trying to go down the drag strip for the first time under full power. So we'll get this thing dialed in and you will see that on the next episode of Rustomod Garage. Thanks so much for watching.